Hey, so does anyone remember the beginning of the universe? $13.8 billion years ago, a speck exploded into everything that would ever be. Somewhere within this cornucopia of wonders was a cloud of dust with grand aspirations. It took time, but the dust came together to form a planet. And upon that planet, the seeds were sown for a new phenomenon. Life. Life that blossomed into endless forms most beautiful, one of which was Will Wright. And Will Wright gazed upon creation, and he was displeased, for though vast and glorious and brimming with promise, creation was incomplete. And Will Wright said, "Let there be Spore." And there was Spore. Hey, so does anyone remember Thrive? Thrive is a free open source game about the evolution of life. From the lowly tide pools of your home planet, you will rise to cosmic dominance. At every step, powerful creation tools and deep simulation mechanics will aid your species' development. Revolutionary Games is the open source team of dedicated volunteers aiming to make Thrive a reality. And if you think I plagiarized that whole spiel from their website, I wrote that. We'll get to that later. Born from the ashes of Spore, Thrive is one of many attempts to turn hard biological science into a video game. And for reasons we'll explore shortly, it's a pretty special one. At least to me. Though the game currently consists of only its first major component, the Microbe stage, even that is a rich demonstration of its lofty goals. And oh boy are those goals lofty. With the game's recent early access release on Steam, I thought it was about time someone put together a definitive guide to all things Thrive. What is it? How does one play it? Where did it come from? And how is it still here when by all rights it should have gone extinct eons ago? Thrive. The evolution of a game. I think the best way to start is an overview of the game as it stands. How to download it, how to play it, and how to get involved. Everything I say is correct as of version 0.5.7, but if you're watching this in the far future, you may need to brush up on your Thrive knowledge elsewhere. Right, let's begin with the basics. There are 5 ways to obtain Thrive, so we're already off to a confusing start, but that's why I'm here. First, you can download the launcher from GitHub. The launcher downloads the full game, deals with errors and logging, and lets you switch between different release versions, all for free. If you'd like more control over the game files, you can instead download releases manually. But for a simpler and more reliable experience, get the launcher. Alternatively, you can buy the Steam release. Why pay money when everything's available for free elsewhere? Well, it's up to you. If you'd like the convenience of Steam or want to monetarily support the developers, this is the way to go. But Thrive is and always will be free to download somewhere. That's a promise. Alongside Steam, there's the store itch.io, a hub for indie game releases. And finally, if you're feeling adventurous, you can clone the source code and set up your own development environment. There are instructions for such an undertaking, but other than mentioning that the game is built on top of the open source engine Godot, I'll leave understanding them to those who know what they're doing. Links to all these options are in the description. With that out of the way, let's fire this thing up, shall we? This is the game. And this is you. You are a cell. A boring, featureless, worthless little cell. But don't worry, we can make you much more exciting with the power of evolution! That's not really evolution because you're editing the organism according to your own whims, making you an all-powerful deity in this kind of perverted intelligent design. But don't worry, because everything else in the environment evolves via natural selection or a simulated approximation of it, so we're all good. Your cell rotates to follow the cursor, and you move through the 2D underwater environment relative to this orientation with WASD. As you move, you use up energy, or in fancy scientific terms, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is your cell's driving force. Everything your cell does, moving, healing, even just staying alive, requires ATP. If your ATP level, displayed in that helpful green bar on the right, ever drops to 0, you no longer have the energy to maintain your own internal structure and thus lose health until you die. Not recommended. You therefore need to create ATP constantly. This is where your metabolism comes in. Your cell can perform a number of chemical processes, although right now we have only one, creating ATP from glucose. You consume stored glucose passively to produce the ATP you need to not die, and since moving requires extra energy, you consume more glucose when you move. Glucose is one of the game's compounds. Your cell collects and converts a number of them, and the panel in the bottom left displays how much of each you have stored. More compounds appear in this list as you evolve the ability to process them, but for now we have just 3. Also, notice that the glucose bar goes down as I move, since I'm using up that precious sugary storage to propel myself forward. We had better deal with that before I die a gelatinous death, so let's find some glucose. Compounds in the environment appear as fluorescent clouds, and right now we're looking for white ones. Ah, there's one. Glucose. You gobble up compounds as you swim through clouds, until you max out your cell's storage. This should keep us alive for a while. Later in the game, your cell will become a beastly conveyor belt of chemical processes, converting all kinds of things into all kinds of other things. Think of it like the game Factorio. Your goal is to build a factory that keeps you alive in the harsh environment. It may be a self-sustaining factory if you crack photosynthesis and taste the sun, or you can take the initiative to hunt other cells and feed their nutritious corpses to the machine. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. All those things require evolving, and evolving requires 2 specific compounds, ammonia and phosphate. These are the building blocks of cell bodies, so let's find some and build ourselves a daughter. Notice the meters on the right fill up before the usual compound storage, since we're setting a certain amount of these compounds aside for reproduction. Ah, the editor button is flashing. We can evolve. Notice our cell and its storage has grown. It has put the compounds to work duplicating all of its parts, and is ready to split via mitosis. Before you edit your cell, you can do 2 things. First, you can peruse various statistics about your home planet and its developing life forms. These get very cool later on as you track the rise and fall of genetic lineages. Second, you can move to a new patch. A patch is a region with particular environmental conditions, ranging from hellish hydrothermal vents to sunny coastal areas. You can only move one patch at a time, so let's do that. You'll notice there are no species here. We'll be pioneers in this new biome. With that done, we move to the real meat of the editor. Here is where you mutate your cell. Along the left, we have a load of organelles. These are microbial organs, each unlocking a new and useful ability. Everything from stabby spikes to mitochondria.
Say the line, Bart!
The powerhouse of the cell. You select an organelle from the list and add it to your cell using a grid, a bit like microscopic hexagonal Tetris. Rotate with A and D to get the best position. Making changes to your cell, such as placing organelles, uses up mutation points. You only get 100 each editor session to represent the incremental changes a species undergoes when evolving, so spend them wisely. Removing or moving an existing organelle is a mutation, so also uses up mutation points. But don't worry, this only counts for parts that were there when you entered the editor. Removing something you just placed gets you those precious mutation points back, as does pressing undo. Some organelles, yes, including mitochondria, are initially locked. These advanced abilities require you to place a nucleus first. This is the brain of the cell, and needs a lot of energy, so you'll have to get your cellular factory ready for the heavy load first. Speaking of which, this is the ATP balance bar, possibly the most important display in the editor. The top bar shows you how much ATP your cell produces, and the bottom shows how much it consumes. If you consume more than you produce, you're in for a bad time. So, watch these bars closely. Note that the bars assume you can keep yourself fed with everything needed to make that much ATP. Down here, you'll see our net glucose output is negative, meaning we need to use up glucose to reach the stated ATP level, and therefore must find it in the environment in order to stay alive. Again, think of it like a factory. Doesn't matter how good that factory is at producing stuff if you never give it the raw materials. Organelles aren't the only power at your disposal. Switch to the Membrane tab and you'll find new membrane types with special abilities and a slider to edit the membrane's rigidity. Then there's the Behavior tab. Here, you can change the behavior of other members of your species. Hyperfocus killing machines or cowardly lethargic blobs. Choose wisely, because like the rest of your cell's construction, the game factors these values into the simulated success of your species. Down here, meanwhile, you can name your species. There's a button to auto-generate a name, or you can enter one yourself, providing it consists of 2 words to comply with the scientific species-genus naming convention. And finally, this button toggles symmetry types. No one ever realizes it exists, so I'm giving it some love. With our cell nice and mutated, it's time to return to the environment. Our cell has evolved and split in 2, and from here on out, the gameplay loop is the same. Find the resources to survive and reproduce, enter the editor, repeat. Here are a few more key mechanics that should help you with that. Pressing G toggles engulf mode. In engulf mode, you swallow anything smaller than you that you swim over, be they iron chunks, floating organelles, or doomed prey. Other offensive tools include spikes and toxin launchers. If engulfing is a close-range weapon, these are your mid-range and long-range weapons respectively. Evolving photosynthesis is perhaps the most powerful strategy, but only works in patches with light. Pay attention to light levels in your current patch so you don't accidentally evolve chloroplasts at the bottom of the ocean. Zooming out makes it easier to find compound clouds, but the real MVP here is the new chemoreceptor, an organelle that points to nutrients at a distance. Or, if you really can't find anything, just abandon the current cell and switch to a new one by pressing this button to die instantly. Really though, all that is but half the game. Let me introduce you to your eternal adversary in this game of survival, Auto Evo. Though you begin the game as the only species, with time, your descendants will flourish into new forms, filling each niche to become prey, predators, and everything in between. I only have time for a rough explanation of the underlying simulation, so here's the gist of it. Auto Evo runs once every editor cycle on a per-patch basis. The game calculates compound intake via environmental sources or predation for each species in the patch. Based on those species' compound processing and survival ability, it estimates the total amount of energy they generated. It then updates populations accordingly to equal total energy generated divided by cost per individual. The upshot? Species which produce more energy become more populous, and vice versa, sometimes leading to extinction. Now comes the evolution stage. Initially, the game tries a few random mutations for each species and runs the population dynamics simulation for a while. Whichever mutations lead to highest population in this simulation within a simulation become the real mutations, sometimes splitting species in 2 if there are multiple good candidates. This look-ahead system prevents the environment filling with deformed evolutionary failures, instead pitting you against more powerful foes to make things challenging. Further, if a species population is high enough, it might migrate to new patches, sometimes speciating in the process. In this way, life gradually spreads from its origins in the deep ocean to the rest of the planet. Yet this wouldn't be much of a game if all that was disconnected from your own gameplay. Sure, thriving as a species is dependent on how well you've designed your cell, but then what's the point of swimming around as that cell and actually playing the game? Maybe you're a total noob who keeps getting spiked in the face to death. That deserves punishment, don't you think? To amend this, the game does a bit of fudging. Based on how species fare in your own field of view, including the player cell, it adds or subtracts artificial population. Your droplet becomes a partial microcosm for the patch at large, meaning that if you do nothing but repeatedly die, the game takes notice and it's into the extinction hole with you. This feedback loop has some exciting effects. For instance, Auto Evo alone can't account for species who develop camouflage. But because the player is less likely to see and kill camouflaged cells, the selective pressure to evolve camouflage exists anyway. As another example, I once became a giant ball of spikes and achieved dominance over the tide pool. That is, until one species developed a foil. Toxin launchers. Suddenly my advantage had been wiped out, and as I struggled to keep up with the evolutionary arms race, my population spiraled into oblivion. This, unsurprisingly, is how you lose the game, going extinct. Actually winning the game, meanwhile, requires you to survive a certain number of generations, though this win condition is temporary and will be replaced in later versions as Thrive development inches towards its next stage, multicellular. But even without that, and the intimidating enormity of whatever comes after, which we'll explore later, there's still a ton to look forward to in the Microbe stage alone, making it a fully featured game in its own right. Currents for surfing along like rivers, day-night cycles to nerf the OP photosynthesizers and buff compound storage, chemical agents for signaling other cells or inhibiting specific organelles, natural disasters and extinction events, endosymbiosis, planet generation, and way too many other ideas to mention. All are at different stages, so there are no guarantees about which of them end up in the game, but even a few would offer an enticing array of gameplay possibilities. If there's a specific feature you'd like to see, then you're in luck. Thrive is open source, so anyone can contribute. The team is always looking for skilled developers to help as much or as little as they want to. Everything is voluntary. C# programmers, artists, and outreach and community managers are the highest priority. But if you think you can help in any way, head over to the website and submit an application to join the team. If you'd like to support development in other ways, as mentioned, the game is available on Steam. But there's also a Patreon if you'd like to go that route. The money goes towards server costs and dedicated part-time pay for the main programmers, the latter of which significantly speeds up development. Otherwise, the best way to support Thrive is to join the community. There are forums, a Discord, a subreddit, etc., all linked in the description. And of course, a little word of mouth goes a long way. So don't forget to share Thrive with everyone you know. Perhaps by showing them this video? You know, just give me those sweet, sweet views. For entirely altruistic reasons, I assure you.
Okay, we start here, and we're in the land of the very small.
Cast your mind back, if you can, to 2005. 17 years ago, and clearly 17 years of much-needed improvements in video resolution. If you can decipher the roughly 12 pixels on screen right now, you might recognise this footage. This is the 2005 GDC demo of the then latest project from visionary game developer Will Wright. Wright was already renowned for his groundbreaking work in the industry, having brought the world the Sims and SimCity franchises with his studio Maxis. In 2005, though, he revealed the promise of an even greater leap forward in the simulation genre: Spore. A single game encompassing life itself, the grand journey from Tidepool to Space Empire, the ultimate story of evolution. This would also be developed by Maxis, now owned by EA. Spore grabbed headlines and the minds of an expectant public for obvious reasons, but for equally obvious reasons, things didn't quite work out. People often talk of the infamous schism in the Spore development team, between Wright's corner, who wanted more science, and EA's mandates for more cutesiness. In reality, it's unclear how true this story is, given conflicting accounts in the years since, and perhaps it's too convenient a shorthand to explain what became of the demo. At any rate, in 2008, Spore hit shelves around the world. And before we get into the weeds, let's not forget, it was a massive hit. Dumbed down or not, Spore shifted the paradigm of creativity-based games. It brought us genuinely revolutionary things. The creature creator in particular stayed true to Wright's hopes for procedural generation, and is undeniably the game's standout highlight. And of course, I can't stop myself praising its generative music, pioneered by ambient music royalty Brian Eno. But this video and everything that led to it only exist because Spore missed its mark. What was billed as the perfect union of science and gaming turned out to fall short on both accounts. The cells have eyes. Big, fully developed googly eyes. Do I need to explain why that's ludicrous? Meanwhile, creatures survive by mashing the fighting or singing buttons in every encounter. Far from the deepest gameplay system ever devised. These two examples are indicative of the hollowness many perceived in Spore. Surface-level gameplay that failed to teach anyone any real science. Strictly speaking, there isn't even any evolution in this evolution game. Look, I can bring back my disclaimer from earlier, this time without the disclaimer on the disclaimer, because outside of the player creature, the environment is basically static. And probably full of... you know what, let's not mention that particular problem. So yeah, that's Spore. Cute, inventive, a stunning technical achievement that lined as many pockets as everyone had hoped, and fundamentally flawed. If you think it's a great game nonetheless, more power to you. I tend to agree, but many do not. One only has to look below the 2005 demo video to see the continual bitterness. Oh hey, that name rings a bell. Given the general post-Spore sentiment, it's understandable that many longed for something more realistic, deeper in both science and gameplay. Enter. No, not that one yet. There we go, that's the one. Evolutions. With an exclamation mark. In 2009, a user named Sørensen posted some intriguing images to the Spore forum. He claimed they were screenshots from a game being developed by faculty at Berlin University. Could this be it? A new, more scientific Spore? No. Evolution's exclamation mark was a hoax. I mean, almost everyone had already guessed the highly polished game screenshots were fake by the time Sørensen admitted it, but a few dared to believe. Some even dared to believe so hard that a rather unexpected thing happened. Evolutions became real. Several forum members, gripped by the dream of a successor to Spore, joined forces to one day make that dream a reality. And they decided to make it open source. For free. At this point, it's time to break out the old Venn diagram. Here's the set of people with game development skills. And here's the set of people who hang around on Spore forums and would want to create someone else's impossible game for free. Alright, that's a bit harsh. I don't mean to throw shade on the efforts made in this mysterious past. Despite expectations, there was genuine work happening and genuine faith in success. We owe everything that's come since to these pioneers. Many no doubt believed they were beginning a story that would be told for years to come, though perhaps not quite like this. While it began with energy and excitement, the passion for Evolutions soon cooled. Aside from the obvious, management disputes and issues with the development forum proved overwhelming. Within a year, the forum had been overrun by spam bots and collapsed. But something had survived. A splinter group had already preserved the essentials in case such a time came, and even as Evolution's death knell was sounding, they were rebuilding. In this thread, in January 2010, a new game took its first breath. Thrive. If you're following along with the cladogram at home, that puts us here. After another forum jump or two, things stabilised, and the new team set to work. It's around this time that we see the plan for Thrive solidifying, becoming the monolithic final product to strive towards that we still see today. Taking inspiration from Spore, the game would consist of several stages, each with its own mechanics and progressively grander scope. Microbe, which you're all familiar with. Multicellular, transitioning to more complex creatures and a 3D world. Aware, an extension of multicellular tracking the player species' growing intelligence. Awakening, when the player begins using tools and building tribes with RTS gameplay. Society, with larger settlements and a research web. Industrial begins as you pass through the Industrial Revolution, before blasting off to space to explore and conquer the galaxy. And finally, after all that, you win the game by building a megastructure called the Ascension Gate, gaining access to god tools for manipulating the universe itself. It's hard to think of anything more ambitious, isn't it? We'll come back to that. This era also brought us much of the iconic concept art that still screams Thrive to this day. One such piece is The Disturbance by Psychont, which has persisted throughout the years as Thrive's de facto mascot, spawning fan art, a Spore build, whatever the hell this is, and even an emoji. How disturbing. Alongside all this far-out brainstorming, there was tentative programming work going on. a prototype here or there, and the very beginning of Thrive's GitHub repository in 2012. But the fact that even this took 2 years to see the light of day hints at Thrive's eternal dilemma. Evolutions and later Thrive started with ideas, and since anyone could contribute, they continued to attract many who bought nothing but more ideas, often effectively wish lists for Spore 2. When your game seeks to cover the entire history of everything, soon the wild speculation drowns out everything else. One notorious example was the underwater civilizations thread. People debated possible strategies for a fully aquatic species to develop metalworking, each time concluding that it was scientifically impossible. But that didn't stop newcomers suggesting ever more convoluted loopholes that made no sense in view of wider gameplay mechanics. Inevitably, the topic was banned. And that's just the beginning of newbies' ridiculous ideas. How about addictive plants that make the screen go funny colours, DAW-like tools to compose a civilization's music in detail, or complex environmental destruction mechanics? I mean, what kind of idiot would come along and burden an already struggling dev team with such superfluous fluff? Things became so bad that in mid-2012, the last remaining programmer resigned, claiming, quite rightly, that expecting programmers to appear out of thin air and make everyone and their dog's craziest dreams come true was not the most viable strategy. Revolutionary Games were not making a game, but a community for speculating about a game that didn't exist. That's the unfortunate truth. Things staggered along a bit listlessly for a while after that. It's probable Thrive would have finally entered the extinction hole, if not for a sudden twist of good fortune. In March 2013, some anonymous soul posted this to Reddit's Today I Learned community. It then hit the front page. I mean, sure, Reddit was much smaller back in 2013, but this was still a massive deal. What was later termed the Reddit boom saw an influx the likes of which Thrive had never known. I remember visiting the forum to see the count of users online, normally at most a dozen or so, exceeding 400. It was as if a tiny village had woken up to a city's worth of tourists filling its streets. Most tourists found the project disorganised and uninspiring, but with so many arriving at once, a few, a beautiful, incredible few, were insane enough to stick around. And, beyond belief, some of them were programmers. In the boom's aftermath and with new blood on board, the team realised things had to change. Turning a ragtag group of dreamers into a game development studio would be a long and painful process, but the transformation was finally underway. Things had started changing already. You're currently watching me play Thrive 0.0.1, the very first official version. As far as I can decipher, it appeared on the scene around January 2013. It and the Reddit boom coincided with a crucial shift in philosophy. Making 7 stupendously ambitious games at once? Maybe not the best idea. Making one relatively simple game that highlights the key ideas and proves the viability of the whole exercise? Now that could work. For all practical purposes, Thrive has thus been the Microbe stage alone since 2013, with a view to move on sequentially to the other stages when ready. And as concepts crystallised from nebulous dreams into cold, hard code, Thrive underwent another transformation. Though it started as Spore 2, the changing views of developers meant Thrive stopped resembling its ancestor in any real way. Beyond being a 2D cell-populated world with an editor where you can add new parts, the Microbe stage is nothing like Spore's cell stage anymore. It's taken its own path, full of compounds and metabolisms and auto-evo. The concepts that do exist for later stages have mutated too, and are sure to mutate further if they're ever realised. I'm sure this will disappoint some of you, but the point bears repeating. Thrive is not Spore 2. If you want Spore 2, there are alternatives. Just the other month, Elysian Eclipse rocked the Spore community, promising its own form of spiritual successor. Not to mention all the other cool evolution sims with their own takes that have evolved over the years. Speaking of years though, question, how long ago was 2013? Although Thrive hit a golden age in 2013, it didn't last forever. Despite the changes, it remained fragile. As developers lost interest, had real-life interruptions, or simply disappeared, things slowed once more. The project entered an era of repeated generational handover. Programmers appeared, learnt to handle the codebase, took charge for a while, then left. Same for almost all the other development teams. Soon, none of the original developers remained. Occasionally, there would be a new boost, yet organisational difficulties soon pulled things back to the status quo. But each cycle chipped away just a little at said difficulties. First came the separation of spaces for fans and developers to focus discussions. Then better guides and dev tools, before a Herculean task to port game engines to something more reliable and user-friendly. Perhaps the most significant steps came much more recently. In 2021, Revolutionary Games became an officially incorporated legal entity. It took a lot of paperwork, but what started as a bunch of people fantasizing on a forum now had legal backing as a game studio. Around the same time, the team bit the bullet and started accepting donations. Money has been a hot topic throughout the development of this staunchly free and open source game. I really don't have time to get into it all, but I do think switching approach here was, in the end, the right decision. The system now in place means fans can still get the game for free, developers can still join and contribute voluntarily, and there are also dedicated part-time employees to stop things going stale. You only have to look at the graph of GitHub contributions over time to understand. At the end of 2021, Thrive arrived on Steam, symbolically becoming a real game. Once upon a time, this was just as much of an impossible dream as the rest of the whole endeavour. But even so, is there any point to caring about something that's taken so long to reach that stage and clearly will never get anywhere else? Oh, but before we get to that, being as old as it is, Thrive has gathered a startling number of inside jokes. No overview of the game would be complete without them, so if you'll excuse me... Roll the comedy music! Nike meets you. Blue cells. Disco mode. This one even became a Steam mod. Thrivium the cryptocurrency. Oh, that aged badly. Ogre Vortex. Belgium.
Disturbed.
Thrive will take forever to finish. Okay, not really an inside joke. Alien Thurv. The Uteen and the 20.5 toothbrushes the hyperdimensional transitional hypothetical metager map told them to buy. RIP hexagon cells. J-Rod. Banana biome. And last but absolutely not least...
But wait! What if they could use the hydrothermal vents to smeltle the meltle?
Oh god.
Not this time of night.
Okay.
If you're just here for the facts, the what and the how, you can stop watching now. I've delivered all the information. There's nothing more you need to know about Thrive. But there is one question still hanging over us. One that strays away from the facts and into the deeply personal. Why? Why should anyone continue working on? Why should anyone care about a project that's taken over a decade to reach very little of what was promised? And why has such an impossible idea persisted anyway? To answer this question, let me tell you a story. A story that begins 10 years ago. A story that begins, as many great stories do, with a YouTube comment. I wish I could say I found the comment again, but after several hours of searching, I can only conclude it must have disappeared. I did find myself, though. In the absence of the real comment, here is my best recollection. It was posted under a video by YouTuber Quill18, probably part of his series playing Victoria 2 in summer 2012. It said, "Hey Quill, have you seen there's a group of volunteers making a more realistic Spore? It's called Thrive and it's open source, you should check it out." Had I not seen this comment, my life would have turned out very different. But I did, and, intrigued, I sought out this Thrive game. I found its page on IndieDB, back then the game's main outreach channel. Naively, I was stunned. The combination of the concept art and music scratched an aesthetic itch I didn't even know I had. Together, they evoked the wonder of life's endless forms most beautiful. A game with accurate science, immersive gameplay, and the ability to guide a species from insignificance to galactic dominance? Sign me up! Wait, it's open source and this is all concept art? They don't have any programmers? The last sign of activity was 3 months ago? At this point, the sane people leave. But I wasn't sane. I was 13 years old and impressionable and hyped AF. I promptly added the IndieDB page to my bookmark so I wouldn't forget about it, and I forgot about it. Only until winter though, when I rediscovered it in those bookmarks. Deeper investigation yielded something I'd missed. A link to the development forum. One small window into Thrive became a sprawling mass of discussion and history to chew through. In January, I posted an introduction to the forum, complete with requisite wild speculation, and that was it. I was part of the team building my dream game. I was maybe half a year into learning how to make music at this point, so I thought my best shot at helping lay there. Within a week, I'd pumped out my first track. If you've ever sorted my channel's videos by oldest and wondered why this video essayist started out with a load of amateurish music for a game that no one's ever heard of, there you go. But it didn't stop with music. Motivated by the post-Reddit boom excitement, I dipped my driven yet unskilled finger into as many pies as I could. I made a promotional video that was nothing but a load of concept art. I made a website. It's secretly still up for some reason. Oh god, it's ugly. The paragraphs are all just spans. What the hell was I thinking? As time went on, I only became further intertwined with it all. I made a GUI. Twice. Both also very ugly, and thankfully replaced in the end by someone who knew what they were doing. I made a better website. It's still the official one, amazingly. I became head of the music team. I made several iterations of the main theme, for instance, each desperately trying to recreate the emotions I felt upon discovering Thrive, to the extent that living up to that ideal became impossible and I've been too intimidated to touch it for years. Sorry. Wait, if Thrive is a successor to Spore, then surely I'm the successor to Brian Eno? Be right back, gotta shave my head and invent a card game about aphorisms. Above all, Thrive was my community. It was the first time I felt I belonged with people I didn't know in real life, and sometimes they were better friends than my actual friends. I idolised the senior devs and the mythic history of the project. Even now, when I know it's ridiculous, I can't look at the old forum or think of their names without feeling reverence. But as time wore on, these monolithic names departed. One by one, during the dips, they disappeared, each time taking some of the hope for the project with them. Until one day I found myself the most senior member left. And despite my best efforts, all these things I did hardly helped make an actual game, at least a game that people respected. You don't need me to tell you that there have been many Thrive naysayers over the years. That science-based 100% dragon MMO energy is hard to avoid. I can't fault anyone for thinking as much. The project hasn't always made positive noises, and even when it has done, the premise is hard to swallow. Even Quill18 was quick to express his disapproval. It's hard to sum up what it's felt like being on the receiving end of this for a decade. I've seen the whole spectrum from "this seems neat, but sadly it'll never be finished," to "you're all idiots and you've stolen my god-given time thinking about a stupid game that's literally impossible because you're so colossally incompetent, and after verbally assaulting the team for days on end I'm going to tell everyone I ever meet that this project is evil and deserves to be violently condemned by the entire scientific establishment." I'm paraphrasing, of course, but not by much. This last instance gave me a multi-day nervous breakdown. I'm not looking for sympathy about it, it's just the facts. Being there for Thrive can be hard sometimes. And increasingly often, I came round to thinking that maybe these people had a point. I grew up. I realised Thrive was the product of some teenagers who didn't understand how the world worked, and it was time to shed the innocence of youth and put Thrive away so I could focus on my real life. With time, with the constant derision, and with the glacial speed of development, I too grew distant. I never abandoned it entirely. The sunk cost fallacy was too powerful to let that happen. But I stopped caring. I became angry that I'd stopped caring. A third of my life spent in service of Thrive to some degree, and I couldn't muster the will to participate anymore. Suddenly, I understood why everyone who had ever loved it had left. And I understood that they weren't mythic figures from a distant past. They were like me. sucked in when they didn't know any better and saddled with a growing burden they had neither the time nor motivation for as they matured. Even so, I couldn't deny that I had a lot to thank Thrive for. The community served as a cradle for my nascent creative skills. It enabled my musical ability to progress from complete amateur to slightly less amateur for one thing. The small amount of programming I did for Thrive contributed to me working as a software developer for a year and potentially again in future. That's pretty rad. And of course, there's this YouTube thing. For years, my channel was nothing but Thrive. I learnt how to produce content and operate an online community that way. When my interest in Thrive waned and I dipped my toe into the surprisingly lucrative market for in-depth videos about things, I drew on those same skills. My channel, and all of you right now, would not be here without Thrive. By the end of last year, I'd accepted the state of affairs. Thrive would always be there, in the background, trundling along, never really making it anywhere, while I invested my creative energy elsewhere. It's a testament to how detached I'd become that I was surprised one day to find the long-held dream of reaching Steam had almost come to fruition. And then it happened. I hadn't played Thrive properly for years at this point. Each time I did, I felt ashamed. Ashamed that I poured so much into something that was unstable, ugly, and generally unimpressive. But I decided I should at least mark the occasion by playing the Steam version, right? I wasn't prepared for the emotions I felt that day. To get the obvious out of the way first, yes, it was still just the Microbe stage and a stripped-down version of it, sure. But while I hadn't been looking, while nobody had been looking, it had found something. Discovered its true self, if you will. It was stable, it was playable, it had an options menu, it had evolution, it had beautiful environments and interfaces, and it had become, in spite of everything everyone had ever said, a pleasant place to spend a few hours. I know that doesn't sound like much, but given how much emotional turmoil it had taken to scale that hill, it felt colossal. Here, on my screen, was part of what I'd hoped to see for years. My inner child hadn't disappeared quite yet. And even that was nothing compared to watching others play it. With the Steam release, there were Let's Plays galore, and I could watch new people discover and fall in love with the game I finally felt proud of. I damn near cried. Not that I deserve the credit, of course. This was the work not of sporadic dreamers, but dedication and organisation, the incremental steps in professionalism I mentioned earlier. This is the true reason Thrive has survived its many scrapes with death. To the devs who managed this, Hirolainen in particular, I am very grateful. Against a backdrop of constant dismissal, constant ridicule, constant strife, Thrive evolved from a pipe dream into a game I can have fun playing. Every now and then I fire it up, watch the environment fill with dynamically evolving species, and enjoy figuring out how best to deal with them. As perhaps the person best acquainted with Thrive's long history, I hope you'll believe me when I say that's miraculous. This is why I believe in Thrive. Do I think we'll ever see the later stages? Honestly, no. But the soul of Thrive, scientific, evolution-based gameplay mixed with wonderful creativity, has found its feet. The Microbe stage as it exists is a solid foundation, and there are clear routes to deep and satisfying gameplay here, finally backed by a well-oiled development machine that can only grow as internet goers become more supportive. Thrive shouldn't exist. It should have died in its infancy and so many times since, but here you are, watching a video about it 12 years later. Look how far it's evolved when nobody believed it would get anywhere. I know some people will never be convinced. I don't blame them. It's a perfectly reasonable opinion, all things considered. But I very much wish to prove them wrong, however long that might take. Consequently, there is one last sting in my tail. Thrive might not be hanging together by threads anymore, but it's still fragile. It still needs those who care to stand up for it. And it certainly helps if those who care may have accidentally acquired 30,000 followers. So, if you in turn care about me, do me a favour and check out the Thrive community. Even apply to join the dev team if you can. You see, if I can't help any other way, I can at least supply propaganda for this project by stealth. 5D chess, Pythagorean tuning, diplomacy, you thought I cared about any of those? No, you've all fallen for a long-running ploy to build an unwitting audience for... Wait. Where's everyone going? Don't... Stop. Belgium. Well, at times like this, there's only one thing for it. Hey, so does anyone remember the Underwater Civilizations thread that got banned? Oh no. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. The release of Thrive on Steam meant I was finally prepared to put this video together after considering it for a long while. It's a very special topic to me. Hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for taking longer than expected to make it, real life has been quite full recently. Not sure what I'll be back with next, but if you're not accustomed to idiosyncratic upload plans by now, you don't know me. Whatever comes next, I will see you then. Goodbye.
But wait! What if they could use the hydrothermal vents to smelt the meltal?